see there. You must be my new client. What was that? Is blood flow restriction training a standalone exercise modality, or should it be used in conjunction with traditional resistance training?
Yep.
Well, Adam, that's a complicated question, but for a healthy individual such as yourself, I believe that BFR is actually a training method that you should use in the volume blocks or maybe the off-season phase of training. To answer this more coherently, I think it's necessary to explain periodized training or traditional training as you referred to it, and then go ahead and refer or explain BFR and the mechanisms of BFR and why that would be useful in a situation such as an off-season training phase or a volume block. So just to clarify, no, I do not think BFR is a valid standalone training method. However, it can be a useful tool in the off-season or in a volume block, as I said. When starting or planning a training program, specificity is the most important variable to consider because the various modalities of training will cater to the desired outcomes or adaptations. So a program will be developed with a specific goal in mind, for example, increasing strength during a powerlifting meet. There are phases of training to consider, which involves the time frame for meeting your specific goal, and using the previous example, an individual or an athlete will have a phase of training dedicated to increasing hypertrophy or size of the muscle before training specifically for strength because of the positive relationship between muscle size and strength. As the powerlifting meet draws closer, the athlete will practice or train using movements more specific to the event and take advantage of the increased hypertrophy developed during the off-season or gaining phase. So to reiterate, training specificity increases as the competition draws closer. So the use of less specific training modalities may be optimal in a gaining phase or an off-season training phase. For powerlifting, this increase in specificity is also accompanied by an increase in intensity and decrease in volume due to the nature of the sport. So as I said before, an increase in intensity accompanies that increase in specificity when it comes to powerlifting. Powerlifting specifically involves 1 rep max attempts on the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. So performing repeated multiple reps at a low intensity under blood flow restriction doesn't seem very beneficial or specific to the sport. However, as I mentioned before, hypertrophy is directly related to increases in strength. So you want a big muscle to increase strength, and blood flow restriction can actually help with that. So as I said before, an increase in intensity accompanies that increase in specificity when it comes to powerlifting. Powerlifting specifically involves 1 rep max attempts on the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. So performing repeated multiple reps at a low intensity under blood flow restriction doesn't seem very beneficial or specific to the sport. However, as I mentioned before, hypertrophy is directly related to increases in strength. So you want a big muscle to increase strength, and blood flow restriction can actually help with that. Keeping in mind that relationship between muscle size and muscle strength, when considering the gaining phase of training, specificity still plays a role but to a smaller effect. So it's here where BFR seems most reasonably fit in. As I said earlier, BFR involves restricting the blood flow but not completely blocking it. So this restriction of blood flow results in blood pooling, and the blood pooling results in accumulation of certain metabolites and also a decrease in certain molecules such as oxygen, like you can see there. In just a minute, we'll examine some studies looking at the effects I just mentioned, but before we do that, I just want to mention the most well-accepted protocol in the literature is performing BFR at 20 to 30% of your 1 rep max. So the first set is 30 repetitions followed by 30 seconds rest, and then 3 sets of 15 repetitions. So each set, so the 30 and the 15s, are each followed by 30 seconds rest for a total of 75 repetitions. So as you can see on the next slide, Jeremy Lenicky et al. In 2012 conducted a meta-analysis on all of the research, and they also recommend that you perform BFR 2 to 3 days per week. Any more than that has seemed to be detrimental to the athlete. So when utilizing blood flow restriction training correctly, the research has shown an increase in fast-twitch muscle fiber recruitment or activity, which are the muscle fibers directly associated with strength performance or anaerobic performance. The research has also shown an increase in muscle protein synthesis through activation of various cascades, including the mTOR. and metabolic accumulation has also been shown and can also affect the above two variables I just discussed. Okay, so the first study we're going to look at is the effects of resistance exercise combined with moderate vascular occlusion on the muscular function in humans. So I just want to mention occlusion again. So it's not technically occlusion, it's actually restriction. So ignoring that for now, this study separated 24 healthy women in 3 groups. The first group being high intensity, which performed bicep curl at 80% of their 1 RM. The low intensity and low intensity restricted groups both performed their exercises or bicep curls at 40% of their 1 RM. So this was done twice a week for 16 weeks, which equals 32 bouts of exercise. Now, electrical activity in the muscle was measured using EMG or electromyography. So as you can see by the graph, the depiction in the graph, the low intensity resistance or LIR group was very similar to the HI group or the high intensity group in electrical activity in the muscle. Whereas the low intensity group without restriction, so just LI, was significantly less than the other 2 groups. It was actually about 40% less than the HI group. So these researchers actually proposed that lactate accumulation due to the blood pooling, so the lactate wasn't able to clear properly, was responsible for inhibiting muscle contraction because that increased acidity led to increased motor unit recruitment or increased muscle recruitment or fast twitch fiber recruitment, as we discussed previously. That Lennick et al. In 2010, in a review they conducted, proposed hypoxia or low oxygen state was actually the cause. So it could be a combination. The next study, performed by Susio and colleagues in the year 2015, examined 4 groups of rats all following the same protocol of 40 consecutive eccentric contractions. And because this is an animal model, the electrical stimulation was provided in order to induce contraction. So dissection of the tibialis anterior, or just a leg muscle, was used to determine the muscle damage in these groups of rats. As you can see from the graphs, various restricted groups experienced significantly less muscle damage than the non-restricted group. So the authors propose that this absence or reduction in damage may be due to decreased calcium ions released from stretch-activated ion channels. So the increased stiffness that goes along with BFR training may have attenuated this response. Another review done by Lennick et al. In 2012 indicates the possibility of increased muscle protein synthesis via cell swelling. So as the muscle contracts, these metabolites enter the cell and water follows due to osmolarity. The increased cell volume activates volume sensors, increasing the pathways described below. Blood flow restriction is clearly beneficial due to the reasons discussed, in addition to the short time period it takes to accomplish. However, in order to ensure proper progression, periods or blocks of training need to be organized, emphasizing intensity as well. Substantiating this is a study examining periodized versus non-periodized training in 38 males. Total volume was equated for both groups, however intensity for the periodized group varied throughout the protocol. Although the findings were not statistically significant, the periodized group increased bench strength by 3.4% as opposed to a 1.2% increase in the non-periodized group. Also, the non-periodized group increased their leg press by 6.3% as opposed to a 5.1% in the non-periodized group. The difference may not be significant, but is still meaningful, and it may hold more merit in trained individuals. So to answer your question, primarily due to the law of specificity and because of the efficacy of periodizing your training, BFR is not a standalone training modality. However, it could be very useful in an off-season phase for a powerlifter, for example. Some of the benefits of BFR include increased muscle protein synthesis, a short amount of time to complete the protocol, decrease muscle damage, and so forth. So you can accumulate volume, you can increase muscle protein synthesis, and work on gaining muscle size to increase muscle strength for maybe an intensity blocker as you approach competition as a powerlifter.